Hello, everybody. Today we're looking at The Light in the Piazza, which is technically a musical, but we're viewing this musical through the lens of opera. So, a little bit about the composer and lyricist. His name is Adam Guettel, and he's a living composer. He's an American, and he's actually the grandson of the infamous music theater composer Richard Rodgers of Rodgers and Hammerstein. So Adam Guettel grew up performing in operas at the Met and has a very dense classical background. I think it's interesting here. Some of his favorite composers and who he was influenced by includes Stravinsky, Ravel, Debussy, Britten, and most notably Stevie Wonder, among others. So I think he has a very eclectic music taste, and it's sort of reflective of what we experience today with the pop scene and all that. So he's really well known for his operas, including Floyd Collins' Love's Fire, and then a song cycle for classical voice called Myths and Hymns. And then his musical, technically, is The Light in the Piazza, which is his most famous work, arguably. And then he also was commissioned by Houston Grand Opera to write a piece called The Invisible Man. So, The Light in the Piazza is based upon a novella of the same title by Elizabeth Spencer and was published in 1960. It's set in the 50s, and it's generally a love story between a very young Southern woman, and she has a disability, which is profound for musicals, right? We're seeing the advent of musicals featuring disabilities is similar to opera, but this was one of the most profound. She was injured as a child, and she's mentally stuck in sort of a very young girl's mindset about age 12. And so she ends up falling in love with a young Italian man, and it's this ethical question of should they be together? Are they able to be together because of her mental abilities and her mental status. So, some side plots include the complications of a mother daughter relationship, and we watch the mom's marriage fail while the two young lovers are looking to get married. And there's a beautiful portrayal of the cultural differences as well as the gender constraints that you found in the 50s in both the US and Italy. And like I mentioned, there's a beautiful portrayal of a disability on stage, and it just covers the messiness of being human. So Piazza was developed, as most Broadway musicals are, in workshops, and it started in 2003 in Seattle, and then moved to Chicago at the Goodman, and then finally they debuted on Broadway on April 18th, 2005, and it was actually at the Lincoln Center. So back to my original argument. The Light in the Piazza has been described as a musical with strong operatic undertones. It has been described as a hybrid work, neoromantic, and grounded in tradition. And so this leads us to believe this is a piece that is a little messy. So let's look. Is it an opera or is it a musical? Well, let's compare. So, traditional view holds that opera and music theater are two separate categories. Opera generally puts the music and the beauty of the human instrument as the focus, whereas music theater puts text and libretto as the focus, or basically the character and the story are more elevated than the music. Well, immediately, I'm sure you can think of examples where this is not true. What about musicals that emphasize a beautiful voice and lush orchestration like this one does, right? What about operas, on the other hand, where the text is the focus? Have we ever seen maybe opera verissimo, where things like Bohème, where the text and the story and the characters are becoming the focus, even though it has a beautiful score? Another simple answer that people provide is that operas are sung all the way through, while musicals have some dialogue. Okay, well, right off the bat, I know that Les Miserables is a musical that has little to no dialogue and is sung all the way through. What about Magic Flute? We already discovered there was a genre just for that. It's called Singspiel, right? What about operas and operettas with dialogue? And then what about opera, but we're gonna make it pop, jazz, rock? I know of Bear, a pop opera, or there are other operas or musicals written by people like Bono, right? And it's just this messiness that's happening now. Um, Another category that we look at is musical sophistication, but I think this is dangerous territory because it's implying class and tradition as class, and that gets sort of messy, right? We can also look at the composer's intention and training, which we can know about Adam Guettel because he's a living composer. And I compare him a lot to people like Ricky Ian Gordon, who is an opera composer. So we can see the differences in the training and then how they chose to present their music to the world in what genre they chose to write in. And my big joke here is just like, where the heck do we put Andrew Lloyd Webber, right? He's writing pieces like Jesus Christ Superstar. These are technically rock operas, right? So it's getting into this messiness of these genres. Here's a quote from Gill, and I'll let you read this on your own, but basically he's arguing that it's all of these music dramas are connected to centuries of tradition. So he is very much rooted in his upbringing and hearing, that his grandfather composed music theater, yet he performed in operas, just goes to show how the mix of the genres can be seen in his work. So here's a list of some more ambiguous, is what I'm using to describe these musical works. Porgy and Bess, Sondheim, Sweeney and Todd, and Sondheim's Passion. And then Bernstein is another great example of a messy composer who had a foot in both worlds. So he wrote West Side Story, which is, the quintessential American musical, but he also wrote Candide, and he also wrote A Quiet Place, and later published as Trouble in Tahiti, which are technically operas. Stephen Schwartz, the composer of Wicked, wrote an opera called Seance on a Wet Afternoon, not very well received, not as well as Wicked, that is. And then Frank Lesser wrote technically an opera called Most Happy Fella, but it was premiered on Broadway. So very, very good examples of this messiness. So the light in the piazza, a few general characteristics, very, very lush, beautiful lyrical writing in the vocal line, really the whole score. And it features roles sung in English only. So those are people like Clara and her mother. They have people singing in Italian and English. This is Fabrizio, and Italian only. There's people like Fabrizio's mother who does not speak any English. So it's this really interesting mixture of cultures, which is already setting this piece apart as a very unique musical. And the Italian is super well set. But we also see really challenging vocal ranges for all of the characters, especially Fabrizio's sister-in-law sings in F6. So we're into Queen of the Night territory here. In addition, the score features beautiful, complex harmonic transitions, lots of chromaticism, and the original score has majority strings carrying the timbral mood, as well as a lot of harp parts. So you'll hear this mixed meter. It makes for a very complex and dense score. And then, yes, and I just mentioned the rhythmic accompaniment. So we're looking specifically at Il mondo era vuoto, and it's sung in Italian by Fabrizio, the main love interest. And so I'll let you just glance at the lyrics if you'd like to pause the video. It's a really, really beautiful, what I consider an aria about her just changing his perspective and waking him up, and she's functioning as his light. And this is Kelly O'Hara and Matthew Morrison who premiered the roles. So let's take a listen as we look at the score. So I just invite you to follow along going across the score, and we will open this link. So here's Matthew Morrison.
Il mondo era vuoto riempivan, la luce non pariva mai. Clara, la luce nella piazza. Clara.
So you'll notice really lush, beautiful melody. And I'm just going to go ahead and stop and reshare to make sure everybody can see what's happening. So you're noticing a very beautiful melody. And then Matthew Morrison is singing in this sort of music theater approach, which is the lens I'd like to examine right now. So thinking about the first time he's meeting Clara, and to me, if you're looking at it through the lens of music theater, it is very text driven, and it functions as this sort of awakening for a character, which is typical in a musical. It's scored with guitar and mandolin, so it gives that rustic, more modern feel, rustic Italian feel. And arguing that it's a musical, right, we can see factually it was workshopped and produced on and through Broadway with music theater performers. And if you are an Italian connoisseur, you'll notice that Matthew Morrison's Italian is not that great. He's flipping and rolling R's in the wrong spots. His vowels are not as clean as a native speaker's would be. So I think that's an important distinction to make. Again, my perspective is a classical singer making that judgment call. But it is something that I notice a native Italian should sound like a native Italian, right? And we can look at the intention of the composer here, but I think it's really just a beautiful ballad for the tenor to sing. So next, let's envision this same piece through the lens of opera. There's a little bit of a sort of a leitmotif here that keeps coming back, Clara, 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 mia luce, mio cor, that he sings many, many, many times. And it's this outcry to his love, which is very operatic. And he also refers to God, right? Oh, Dio, Clara, right? This is a big operatic moment, and you can't ignore the sort of tradition arguably seen in these moments. And again, if we're looking at it through the lens of opera, it's happening in Italian, the most operatic language ever, right? The setting is Italy. The music is arguably overwhelming the text here. It is text driven, but the music is dense. The music is complicated. There's a harp and a full orchestra behind him. And it's a completely different performance when it's sung by a classically trained singer. So I do want to show you, and I will reshare a performance by a student at Eastman, and he sings it in a very classical context, and it's exciting. It's exciting to see it with the staging too. So here is the Eastman student. So we're seeing lots of Italianate vowels. We're seeing a totally different approach vocally. And I think that really influences the singing here. So jumping back into my presentation, I just wanted to do a little bit about its place in the repertoire. So it's had mixed reception, definitely unique for Broadway, but very successful, I think, due to Adam Guettel's reputation. Obviously rooted in classical tradition, and still programmed mostly for theaters and summer stock festivals. Although after it aired on PBS, there was a version through the Lincoln Center that was produced. It gained more popularity, and the most recent production featured Renee Fleming. So someone who is a traditional only opera singer is singing at places like the London Royal Festival Hall and the Chicago Lyric. And we're seeing that a lot nowadays, where an opera company will program a golden age musical or a neo-romantic musical like Piazza to draw in audiences. So here's a list of many things that we're considering in this sort of battle versus opera and music theater, right? The style, the dialogue, use of language, especially in this show, right? The intention, the singers who premiere their roles and the singers who are singing them today. The context of the production and the type of production mounted plays a huge role. The orchestration and then the emphasis finally on text versus music is one of the most ambiguous things that can be argued. And again, there's so much more that it didn't cover here. So I'd love to know if you think it is still a musical with operatic undertones, or if you are more convinced that Guettel is writing an opera with sort of modern musical flair. Let me know. And here's my works cited.